Okay, the West End games. Druid, another Richard Berg game. He prominently had his name put on the front of that one. This one, I got an interesting history from it. West End always kind of intrigues me, but one of the things that I consider is, you know, a whole bunch of guys from SPI went over to Victory Games, and a few of them, Greg Kostikian comes to mind, and Berg, and I think Eric Lee Smith actually went there in part two, if I recall correctly. Whoever did the Across 5 Aprils or whatever. There was a Civil War game that I really want to get. Shiloh as well. I don't know who did those, but anyway. You get the feeling when I think about it, or I got the feeling when I think about it, and this may be just fantasy, that, you know, there was a group of people who were like, oh yeah, Avalon Hill's giving us a great offer here, you know, full Monarch Avalon printing support, and we can put out the games we want to make. And Mark Herman led that little group over and made some fantastic games. At the same time, some of the SBI people went over to West End Games, and there may be some crossover there. If Smith is in both, if he did anything for West End, because he certainly did stuff for Victory Games. But you get kind of the feeling that, well, you know, they may not have been happy being under that Avalon Hill banner, because there had been something of a significant rivalry. Not as big a deal as, oh yeah, we're under TSR now. Yeah, screw that, man. I mean, everybody left. It was really not a police thing. Anyway, for me, this game has always been kind of interesting, and it shows some nice little novel approaches to things that have become more common. I'm not sure it's the first place to show this sort of impulse movement and stuff. I think, yeah, by '84, Victory Games was already doing stuff like this. It's got a kind of combat system that is reminiscent of some stuff, or foreshadows some of the stuff that Berg does later on. This is probably the first of kind of the reductium ad absurdum type thing, but here it uses dice instead of just an odds modifier. You get dice for each set, so it's almost like a firepower table. And interesting system for that. Maybe because of the bland graphics, that's one of the problems with, well, maybe not bland, but unattractive graphics. That's one of the things I never liked about West End, and kind of crappy counters. Although I've got to say, Victory Games counters weren't all that great either, compared to, say, the SPI ones. This never appealed to me quite as much as it should, perhaps for what the gameplay is. But the interesting thing is, I've brought this to a number of people's first playings, whatever. My ex-wife, another girlfriend, a few buddies that I gamed with, some of which weren't really wargamers at all. And it's, I think, been met with incredibly positive responses by everyone I've played it with. The less they are a wargamer, the more surprisingly positive they were about it. There's something about this that captures the feeling in a way that maybe a lot of wargames don't, and that's very impressive. I know there was an update to this that I think came out in Against the Odds magazine. I don't remember what it is. It's not Hell Hath No Fury. I have that as well. A much less impressive game. And hopefully they did a graphical update and also maybe improved the rules a little bit. I hope they didn't tinker too much with the system, because the system's actually pretty cool. And let's take a look at what the rules are like. Well, let's look at the components. You got your kind of ugly map, bad 80s style map. Counters have a couple of values on them. The strength point and a movement allowance, and then a little image. The back side, not of that one, will have a reduced value after a step loss. These units have effectively 4 steps, although their extra steps are on other units that are in the game, I think. I have to count and make sure that that's correct. Maybe they have a spare unit there. That would make sense. That actually explains a numbering issue I had. You have two different types of units on the board. Well, more than two, but you have the Roman legionaries, you have Roman auxiliaries, and then you have tribal units. And the tribes at the beginning, there are 4 tribes on the board. Those are going to be allied with Boudica. It is possible for some of these other tribes to end up Roman allied, and it's also possible for them to join the war on Boudica's side. More likely there. You have leaders, which are a little different. They have an operations point, value. The middle is a combat value, and then there's a movement value. There's Boudica over here. She's busy trying to convince other people to join her cause. Some holding boxes, mainly important for the legions, but the leaders have hordes on them. These little hidden Britain unit boxes, they're an optional rule. I think I'm going to try to play with them, but they're kind of tough when you're playing solo. Bunch of informational counters, probably not as many as you need, but it's hard to tell whether I'm interpreting the rules correctly on that. In particular, the moved markers. Every time you move a unit, should one be on it? It doesn't say. It only says they go on there if they're retreated. Then you got these little number counters. And what's going to happen at the beginning of each turn is these are going to be your ops points that you draw, and they're pretty random, running from like 0 to 9 or something. And your overall commander is able to increase the ops points by their operational value, the middle number there. So Boudica will give me a +1. Silenus, when he comes in, or Paulinus, sorry, is worth 2, and he's got a 1 leadership, military leadership. He's not as good a leader as Boudica, but that's okay because he's got Roman legions. Okay, and we have the different graphics for the different types of units for what that matters. Sequence of play. The core here is you each draw one of these, keep it secret, and you're going to spend them as you go. Now I'm probably going to track them over on the track, but normally you would spend them, you would openly spend operations points during your turn, but your opponent doesn't know how many you have. The next thing you do is the Romans have to check to make sure their legions are in supply. They have these supply tracks. Every turn that they're outside of a city, they're going to spend a point of supply at this point. If they're out of supply when they have to spend a point, they take some attrition. Then the Romans get to move their civilians. They have these little civilian units and only have a movement allowance. They have restrictions on when they're allowed to move them. Those guys have to be afraid for you to move them. They have to have tribals near them that are in revolt or something. They really don't want to leave their homes and try to pack their goods up. And they're not very good at running because they only have 4 movement points. They're hauling all their crap with them, so they're probably going to get slaughtered if and when they run. Then the Britain player is able to use his Druids for a couple of purposes. He's got a couple of charts here that he can use. One is the Berserk unit table. He can use this whenever he like with a Druid each turn. And this gives a bonus or perhaps a penalty in terms of like frightening the troops to all the troops that are stacked with those Druids. The other thing is every other turn, well, you can't do it 2 turns in a row. One of your Druids can do the Druid invocation table, which can give you a good effect. Now in either case, to do one of these costs you an operations point. Each Druid can only do one of them, and you can only do the invocation once and not on consecutive turns. Okay, then we get to the meat of the game, which is the operations phase. The Druid player has the first option to move. He can spend as many operations points as he wants to do stuff. And in general, I'm trying to see if there's any kind of point chart, but I think in general, oh, here it is. In general, everything costs 1. So moving a stack costs you 1. Sacking a town will cost you 1. Now, from what I can tell of the game, when you move a unit, you can't move it again. And that would make sense that there'd be these moved markers. but there's some special rules about those moved markers that aren't in the moved section. The moved section doesn't mention them. They're in the retreat section, and they seem to have other effects than movement, which is kind of weird. They have an effect on interception, which leads me to wonder, gee, are moved units unable to intercept? What's going on here? We'll talk about that. So the Briton is able to take his actions. Now, sacking towns, you have to end your turn, you have to begin your turn in the town to sack it, and it takes the full turn to do. So you have to kind of win a battle and then spend the time to sack it. You're not going to just ravage over the entire territory. And that's kind of painful. Anyway, after the Briton takes as many ops points as he wants to spend, unless he spends none, in which case he's officially passed, then the Roman gets to spend as many as he wishes, or passed. If both players pass consecutively, the turn's just over. You wasted your ops points. Stacking. The main rules on stacking have to do with not putting things together that can't be near each other. So like 2 Roman legions can't stack with each other unless Paulinus is there. Tribal units can't stack with Romans. Different tribes can't stack together unless there's a Druid or Boudica, I think. There's rules like that. The Romans have the right to force march, which is going to allow them to march a second time in the turn. And that costs them another operations mark point. They end up getting a little force march marker on them that I believe has some effects on combat. Does it have an attrition check? No, you have to stay on the road, and you could not be in combat during your first march, and you, I don't believe, can... Oh, you can attack. However, if you have a forced march marker and you're attacked, the Britons get a bonus on that. However, if they attack, there is no bonus. Cav forced march at the infantry rate. So Viconium is a special city. It's both a Roman-occupied fort, and it's the capital for the Carnovi, which can cause some special cases. I'm not going to worry too much about that. Hidden deployment and movement. The Britons are able to, when they go into the woods, put one of these markers in the woods, and that just indicates there's Britons moving around in those woods, and I don't know where they are as the Romans. And they're tracked secretly on paper. If I move into a woods hex with them, the Britons have to announce, hey, you just ran into my troops. I can do interceptions and stuff with them. I can do all kind of stuff, but they're just, some units can go invisible, and it's pretty much any size force can go invisible from that. The way interception works is if the enemy moves into range, which is, I don't remember what it is. Let's see if there's maximum range is 3 hexes. Should be an interception chart somewhere. I'm mistaken. There it is. Based on the distance of the hexes, what the space is, whether or not there's cav present, gives you a chance of hitting them. You have to spend an operations point to try to intercept. If you do, you get an immediate battle. During movement, if you run into the enemy's units, you get an immediate battle. Because remember, it's pulsed. So, you know, I walk in, oh, I found you, I fight. In the same hex. No zones of control, nothing like that. So, the restriction on interception is if you retreat, here's what it comes down to. If you retreated, you get this moved marker. And you can't intercept if you have that. I don't know if that means that units that moved are not allowed to intercept, which would kind of make sense. But you're allowed to intercept multiple times. It doesn't really fit together to me. To me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these moved markers to mark retreating units to say, hey, they're running away, they're not going to intercept anybody. And then I'm going to use some other way to mark moved units, just maybe rotate them so that I don't move them twice in a turn. Because I think that's what the rules explicitly say, and it makes sense. Unfortunately, it doesn't really correspond with what the counter says, but maybe there was a decision to change the rules after the counters had been designed and printed. Combat itself. Combat itself is going to be based on this table. And basically you decide whether a battle is a major battle or a skirmish. If both sides are over 10 strength points, it's a major battle. If one side's over 10 and they have better than, I think, 3-2 odds, it's a major battle. If it's in a fortified zone, it's a major battle. Otherwise, it's going to be a skirmish, basically, if it's small forces meeting each other. Or close to small forces at near odds, which is kind of disturbing to me. Like 10 units fighting 9 units is a skirmish, but 10 units fighting 2 units is going to be a major battle. The terms don't matter for anything except the casualties they generate, though, so you can ignore the term itself and just worry about what it causes. So the way the combat's going to be resolved is it's going to be resolved in rounds. And you have this set of adjustments here. So, for example, if you're attacking an unsacked town, you get a -1 to all your dice. The leader adds his battle rating to only 1 die per round. You're going to get a number of dice equal to your odds ratio. So if I've got 2 to 1 on you, I get 2 dice, you get 1. If I got 3 to 1, I get 3, you get 1. If I have 5 to 2, I don't get 5 and you get 2. We round to the whole number for this. In the case of 3 to 2 odds, though, the first round of combat, the person with the larger force gets 2 dice instead of 1. And that's about it there. There are terrain effects listed here as well, movement costs, I don't know what the parenthesized and hidden movement. There's no combat listed there. Terrain effects on combat are unfortunately kind of buried in here, like +1 Britain units attacking Romans in forest or wooded hills. -2 if the Romans are fighting hidden Britons. And that combat chart is not well represented, so it's going to be hard to kind of grok the information that's present in it, essentially. There are overruns possible. 7 to 1 is an overrun, but it stops your movement. 10 to 1 is an overrun that just costs you a couple movement points and you can keep going. After the first round of battle, you're allowed to withdraw, but only if you have less strength points. And if you withdraw, you run the furthest, you get a little moved marker to indicate you retreated. The withdrawn units can then be pursued by the victorious units if they have a greater cav strength. And this is going to be an additional round of battle. Just getting dice with their cav strength points. Military posts and towns. Military posts have no defensive value, but they can be sacked for victory points. Towns and capitals do give a defensive value. A benefit. Nah, both give a defensive benefit. They just worded this poorly. If you end your movement in a hex on the next turn, you can sack a town. Oh, wait. No, you can sack right away. What the hell is it that you can't? There was something that requires... Oh, the sack of a town also requires a full turn. This means a Briton must end the hex in the first... See, this is weird. So, sack of a town may be performed in the same segment that the sacking units enter, in a subsequent segment, or even in a subsequent turn. Great. The sack of a town, of either town... Oh, Londinium and Camalundon are big. So they're the only two that I have to start a turn with to sack. I lied about that. Like I said, special rules about Vericonium. I'm not going to worry too much about that. I'll go into it when we hit them. The Roman legions I think I've got an extra unit in each Legion I've got to pull out because they have an elite unit, which is a 4-step unit instead of a 2-step unit, and I think the extra steps are not supposed to be on the board. There are some things which apply to an intact Legion. In particular, the supply rules for Legions require that the Legion kind of be intact to resupply. If it's not intact, well, whichever force had the lowest supply status is going to be the supply status of the entirety of the Legion. And if any unit needs supplies and has to expend them, they're expended across the board. And there may be bonuses for, yeah, there's bonuses for an intact Legion on the die roll, on the combat charts. If you don't have supply, you take attrition. It's basically a step loss. You move slower, you can't force march, and you have a penalty in battle. Okay. Some of the Legions start off board, and in order to bring them on, you have to spend ops points and roll on an activation based on the turn that it is. So if I want to act, and all of the onboard Legions are inactive at the beginning of the game. All the auxiliaries are active, but the Legions are not. So if I want to activate a Legion, I have to roll a die, and I have to spend an ops point. I have to keep one of my Legions in reserve. Doesn't matter which one, but that one's particularly useful just because of its location and how hard it is to bring into play. Maybe I'm lying. No, that's the good one. That's the one I do not want in reserve. The 14th would be my best in reserve, but that's not on the board yet, so I can't do that. So I would say the 9th is the one I want to be in reserve. Great. Okay. I was just reading the chart wrong. The 9th is the hardest to bring into play. I don't have to designate it until the end of the first turn. That Legion can't activate until the beginning of the 10th turn. However, it has, there are some exceptions to that. If it's attacked, it can be activated. And if I'm playing with the spontaneous Britain revolts, if 2 of those happen, and I haven't decided if I'm playing with it yet, then the Reserve Legion can be activated from then on. There are certain places where I have to have garrisons. 20 strength points in Lindium, up here. That's a good reason. Otherwise, the Brigantes, who are kind of the biggest tribe other than the Iceni, the big Boudiccan tribe, will just revolt. And also I have to keep 20 strength points in Glevum and Verconium between them, or else, and I have to keep a unit in each, or else the Silians revolt. And they're another big Silurius revolt. They're another big tribe that can cause me a lot of trouble. It's also possible for Boudica and the Druids to cause units to revolt. They have to pay a point. There's the summary of all the tribal locations. There are these red spaces, and I've picked the couple that I want to be in, and then I roll on the tribal revolt table, wherever that was. There it is, to see what happens. And there's a possibility the tribe says, screw this, man, we're with the Romans, which could be very bad if it's, say, the Brigantes, who are huge. Let's see. Leaders have a couple of effects. One is they add to your ops points, your main leader. You each only have one that can, one leader that can do this each turn. The Druids, however, if Boudica is killed, are able to add to that instead of her. And they can add to your combat ability, and the Druids can't do that. Leaders can be hunted down by Cav. They have a chance of being killed if they're caught alone by Cav. Druids, everything has a chance of being killed. You roll some dice. If I lose a Druid, I've got 2 replacement Druids that I can bring in for an ops point each. I can only have 2 on the board at any one time, but I do have those replacements in place. The Romans can build bridges, both sides can destroy bridges. Cost operations to do so. And the victory points is basically taken for the Britons for destroying things, including troops, and for the Romans also basically sacking stuff, keeping civilians from leaving their town, keeping them alive. I get 2 points for occupying an unsacked capital, but sacking capitals is worth more. So I probably want to just whack them instead of garrisoning them. And that's about it. It's a cute little game. We'll give it a shot very, very shortly.